You ever have one of those dates where everything feels off right from the start? Like the universe is practically screaming at you to cancel and stay home, but you don't listen? Yeah, that was me, and I should have listened. I'll never ignore those warnings again. It all started when I matched with this guy, Alex, on some dating app. He seemed normal, charming even. His profile was filled with pictures of him hiking, hanging out with friends, and even a couple with his dog. He worked in tech, lived about 30 minutes away, and had a dry sense of humor that matched mine perfectly. Our conversations were effortless, like we'd known each other for years. So, when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner at this quaint little Italian place he loved, I said yes, without hesitation. The first red flag was subtle. On the day of the date, he texted me to ask if I could pick him up. He said his car was in the shop. It wasn't a big deal. People have car troubles all the time. But something about it made my stomach twist. Still, I pushed the feeling aside and agreed. When I arrived at his apartment, the second red flag hit me square in the face. Alex didn't live in a nice, modern building like I'd imagined from his pictures. No, his place was a run-down, grimy building with flickering hallway lights and a faint smell of mildew. But hey, I'm not one to judge someone by where they live. Maybe he just hadn't updated his photos, or maybe he was saving up for something better. I parked and texted him that I was outside. A minute later, he emerged, and I immediately noticed that he didn't look quite like his photos. He was still Alex, but his pictures must have been old. His hair was thinner, his face gaunter, and his eyes. There was something about his eyes. They looked hollow, like he hadn't slept in weeks. But again, I told myself not to be shallow and to give him a chance. Everyone has bad days, right? He slid into the passenger seat and flashed me a crooked smile. Thanks for picking me up. You're a lifesaver. The drive to the restaurant was odd. Alex didn't talk much, and when he did, his responses were short and vague, nothing like the witty banter we'd had over text. Instead, he spent most of the ride staring out the window, drumming his fingers on his knee. The radio filled the awkward silence, but it did little to calm my growing unease. When we finally arrived at the restaurant, I felt a brief wave of relief. The place was cozy and bustling, with warm lighting and the mouth-watering aroma of garlic and fresh bread. We were seated at a small table near the back, and for a moment I thought maybe the night could still turn around. But then Alex started talking. At first it was harmless enough. Small talk about work, hobbies, and mutual interests. But as the conversation went on, his demeanor shifted. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you ever feel like you're being watched?" he asked, his eyes darting around the room. I blinked, caught off guard. Not really. Why?" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before leaning even closer. "There's someone that's been following me, watching me. I think they're here right now." My stomach dropped. I let out a nervous laugh, hoping he was joking, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't. "Alex, are you okay?" He nodded quickly, too quickly. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just, they don't like it when I go out. I shouldn't have come here." I didn't know what to say. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Or was he genuinely paranoid? Either way, I decided to change the subject. "So, tell me more about your dog." "He's cute." For a moment, Alex's expression softened. "Max? Yeah, he's a good boy. Keeps me company." Then his face darkened again. "But even he senses them. He'll start barking at nothing, growling at corners. It's like he knows." I forced a smile and nodded, pretending to be interested, but my mind was racing. This was officially the weirdest date I'd ever been on, and I was counting down the minutes until I could politely excuse myself and leave. When the waiter brought our food, Alex barely touched his. He kept glancing around the room, his body tense like a coiled spring. At one point, he muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch. When I asked him to repeat it, he just shook his head and said, "Never mind." By the time the check arrived, I was ready to bolt. I reached for my wallet, but Alex stopped me, his hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "No, let me," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's okay," I replied, trying to pull my hand away. "We can split it." I said, "I've got it." His tone was sharp, almost angry. I relented, letting him pay, but the interaction left me shaken. As we walked back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was indeed watching us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once. When we reached the car, Alex hesitated before getting in. "Can you take me somewhere else first?" he asked. "Where?" "It's just a quick stop. I need to grab something." Against my better judgment, I agreed. He directed me to a secluded area on the outskirts of town, where the streetlights were few and far between. The road was lined with dense trees, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. My unease grew with every passing second. "Here," Alex said abruptly, pointing to a small clearing. I pulled over and killed the engine. "What are we doing here?" "Wait here," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'll be right back." Before I could protest, he was out of the car and disappearing into the darkness. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding. Minutes passed, and he didn't return. The longer I waited, the more certain I became that I needed to leave. Whatever Alex was doing out there, I wanted no part of it. Just as I was about to start the car and drive away, I saw him. He emerged from the trees, but he wasn't alone. Behind him was a shadowy figure, tall and thin, with elongated limbs that didn't seem entirely human. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, unable to look away. Alex opened the passenger door and slid in, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Drive," he said, his voice trembling. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Just drive," he shouted, slamming his hand against the dashboard. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped down the road, glancing in the rearview mirror to see if the figure was following us. But the road behind us was empty, eerily so. "Alex, what's going on?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. He didn't answer, just kept muttering to himself, his hands gripping his knees. When we finally reached his apartment, he turned to me, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have involved you." Before I could respond, he got out of the car and disappeared into the building. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to follow him, to demand answers, but the other part of me, the part that valued my safety, told me to leave. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with questions. Who was Alex, really? What had he seen in those woods? And most importantly, what had I just escaped from? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside my window made my heart race. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were filled with shadowy figures and hollow eyes. I never heard from Alex again. His profile disappeared from the dating app, and when I tried to look him up online, it was like he'd never existed. To this day, I don't know what happened that night or what I narrowly escaped from. But one thing is certain, I'll never ignore my gut instincts again. Dating apps always seemed like a gamble. but I never imagined one would lead to the most terrifying night of my life. It started innocently enough, swiping through profiles on a lazy Friday night. That's when I came across Jenna. She had this magnetic smile, the kind that made you feel instantly comfortable, like she could light up a room just by walking into it. Her bio was witty and intriguing, filled with just the right amount of mystery. She loved hiking, obscure horror movies, and late-night diners. It felt like we were a perfect match. When she messaged me first, I couldn't believe my luck. We chatted for a few days, and everything about her seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe. But I didn't let that stop me. When she suggested we meet in person, I jumped at the chance. She proposed a local diner that stayed open all night, one of those retro spots with neon signs and red vinyl booths. It felt quirky and safe, the perfect setting for a first date. I arrived a little early, nerves buzzing in my chest. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter, and a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered a coffee while I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Just as I started to think she'd bailed, the door chimed, and there she was. Jenna was even more stunning in person. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose braid, and she wore a leather jacket that looked like it had a story to tell. She smiled when she saw me, and for a moment, all my nerves melted away. She slid into the booth across from me and apologized for being late. Something about traffic. I didn't care. She was here, and that's all that mattered. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything: our favorite horror movies, weird childhood memories, the best spots in town for late-night food. She was charming, funny, and a little mysterious. But every now and then she'd say something that didn't quite add up, like when she mentioned a local hiking trail that I knew had been closed for years, or a band she loved that I was pretty sure had broken up before we were even born. I brushed it off, chalking it up to nerves or a quirky sense of humor. It was around midnight when things started to feel off. The diner had emptied out completely, leaving just us and the waitress, who was now leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone. The air felt heavier, the hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly too loud. Jenna's demeanor shifted too. She leaned in closer, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice low. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Sure. Do you believe in fate?" It wasn't the question I'd been expecting. I laughed nervously. "I guess. I think some things are meant to happen." "Why?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Because I think we were meant to meet tonight. I think this was supposed to happen." Before I could respond, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her touch was ice cold, and I instinctively tried to pull away, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Jenna, you're kind of freaking me out," I said, half joking, hoping to lighten the mood. She tilted her head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle she was trying to solve. "You feel it, don't you? The pull, like we've known each other before." My heart was pounding now, and I glanced around the diner, hoping the waitress might intervene. But she was gone. The counter was empty, and the only sound was the hum of the lights. I turned back to Jenna, and for the first time I noticed something strange about her eyes. They seemed darker than before, almost black, and her pupils were wrong. Too large, swallowing the color around them. "Jenna, maybe we should call it a night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's getting late." She didn't let go of my hand. Instead, she leaned in even closer, her face inches from mine. "It's already too late," she whispered. The lights flickered, and for a split second, everything went dark. When they came back on, Jenna was no longer sitting across from me. She was standing beside the booth, her hand still gripping mine. I hadn't even seen her move. My breath hitched as I looked up at her, realizing that her once perfect smile had twisted into something grotesque. Her teeth, they were too sharp, too long, and her skin seemed to ripple, like something was moving underneath it. I yanked my hand away and scrambled out of the booth, my chair clattering to the floor. "Stay away from me," I shouted, backing toward the door. She tilted her head again, watching me with an eerie calm. "You can't leave," she said. "Not yet. We're not finished." I turned and bolted for the door, but when I reached it, it wouldn't budge. The handle wouldn't turn, no matter how hard I twisted it. Panic set in as I pounded on the glass, screaming for help. Outside, the street was empty, the neon sign casting a sickly glow on the pavement. It was like the whole world had gone silent. "Why are you running?" Jenna's voice came from right behind me, and I spun around to see her standing just a few feet away. "You wanted this. You swiped right, didn't you?" I backed away, my heart racing. "I don't know what you are, but stay the hell away from me." She laughed, a low, chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, you'll know soon enough." Before I could respond, the lights flickered again, plunging the diner into darkness. I froze, every muscle in my body tense, straining to hear where she was. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then a whisper, so close it felt like it was right in my ear. "You can't escape fate." I spun around, but there was nothing there. The lights came back on, and I was alone in the diner. The booth where Jenna had been sitting was empty, no sign that anyone had ever been there. The door was unlocked now, swinging open with a soft creak. Without a second thought, I ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the engine roaring to life as I peeled out of the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the diner was gone. Just an empty lot where it had stood moments before. To this day, I don't know what Jenna was or what she wanted from me. I deleted every dating app I had that night and haven't used one since. Sometimes, late at night, I'll see a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye or hear a whisper when I'm alone. And I wonder if she's still out there, waiting for our story to finish. I've always hated blind dates. There's something about walking into a situation with zero context that puts me on edge. But when my best friend, Sarah, insisted that her coworker, Liam, was perfect for me, I decided to give it a shot. After all, what's the worst that could happen? The plan was simple. Meet at a cozy little bar downtown. Sarah described Liam as kind, funny, and a little shy. She even showed me a picture of him, and he looked normal enough. Brown hair, friendly smile, glasses. He wasn't exactly my type, but I figured one drink wouldn't kill me. I should have listened to my gut. When I arrived, the bar was packed. The hum of conversation and clinking glasses filled the air, and the warm lighting made the whole place feel inviting. I spotted Liam almost immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, nursing what looked like a whiskey neat. He waved when he saw me, his smile just as Sarah had described, friendly and unassuming. "Hey, you must be Emily," he said, standing up to shake my hand. His voice was soft but confident, and I felt a small wave of relief. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. We ordered drinks and started talking. At first, everything seemed fine. He asked about my job, my hobbies, my family. He told me about his work as a graphic designer, his love for cooking, and his recent attempts at learning guitar. But as the night went on, something about him started to feel off. It was subtle at first. He would ask strangely specific questions like, What's your exact birth time? And do you ever have recurring dreams about drowning? I laughed it off, thinking maybe he was just quirky. But then he started steering the conversation toward darker topics. Have you ever thought about what happens after we die? He asked, swirling the last of his drink in his glass. I guess so, I replied cautiously. Why do you ask? He leaned in, his expression serious. Sometimes I think certain people are meant to die, at a specific time, in a specific way, like it's predestined. I forced a nervous laugh, trying to keep the mood light. That's a little morbid for a first date, don't you think? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sorry, I guess I've just been thinking about it a lot lately. I nodded, suddenly very aware of how far we were from the other tables. The bar felt darker, quieter. The laughter and chatter that had filled the room earlier seemed distant now, like we were in our own little bubble. I glanced around, looking for the waitress, but she was nowhere to be seen. Liam's next words sent a chill down my spine. Do you believe in coincidences? I swallowed hard. Not really. Why? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table to me. Open it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. It was a printout of an article from a local news site. The headline read, "Fatal car crash claims life of young woman." Beneath it was a photo of a totaled car, and below that, a name that made my blood run cold. Emily Carter. My name. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice shaking. Liam's gaze was steady, unblinking. It hasn't happened yet, but it will. I shoved the paper back at him. Is this some kind of sick joke? Did Sarah put you up to this? He shook his head slowly. I've seen it, Emily. It's going to happen. You can't avoid it. I stood up, grabbing my purse. This was a mistake. I'm leaving. Wait, he said, his voice calm but insistent. You need to know something else. I don't need to know anything from you. I snapped, backing away from the table. But as I turned to leave, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. You'll see her tonight. I froze. What? The woman from your dream, the one you've been drowning with. She's waiting for you. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might faint. How do you know about that? He didn't answer. He just smiled that same unsettling smile and leaned back in his chair, watching as I stumbled out of the bar. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it did little to calm my racing thoughts. I practically ran to my car, fumbling with my keys as I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting Liam to follow me. But the street was empty. As I drove home, the words from the article played over and over in my head. Fatal car crash. Emily Carter. My name. My death. It was ridiculous, I told myself. A sick prank. Nothing more. But then the headlights appeared. They came out of nowhere, blinding me as a car sped toward me from the opposite lane. I swerved, my tires screeching as I narrowly avoided a collision. My car skidded to a stop on the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. That's when I saw her. She was standing just outside my car, illuminated by the faint glow of my headlights. A woman in a white dress, her long hair dripping with water. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, and her lips moved silently, like she was trying to speak but couldn't find the words. I froze, too terrified to move. She took a step closer, and I could see the water pooling around her feet, spreading across the pavement like a tide. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was her, the woman from my dreams. Suddenly, she raised a hand, pointing past me, down the road. I turned to look, and that's when I saw the car. It was coming fast, its headlights bearing down on me like twin suns. I barely had time to react before it smashed into my car, flipping it over and sending me spiraling into darkness. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, bruised, battered, but alive. The police told me I was lucky. The other driver had fallen asleep at the wheel, but I knew better. That crash had been meant for me. Liam had been right. I couldn't avoid it. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see her, waiting. For what, I don't know, but I'm terrified to find out.